Good afternoon. I'm Julian Vasquez-Heilig, Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Western Michigan University. It's an incredible honor to serve this community and to be here with each one of you for this important announcement, this important new way forward for our university and for our community. And I'm here to also give honor and respect to the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized tribes. We advocate for the historical tribal communities in Michigan in this work. And for indigenous families and communities. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and an enduring relationship that exists between the people of the Three Fires and this land. While this is merely a first step, we are committed to listening, learning, and action to fulfill this land acknowledgement. We recognize that Western Michigan is located on the homelands of the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Bodawa-Ome nations, and WMU seeks to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands of all indigenous peoples and their continued presence on this land. I will now read the official land acknowledgement. Western Michigan was the second university in the state. We were glad that our other 15 public institutions have now also adopted land acknowledgements after that time. Western Michigan University is located on lands occupied by the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Bodawa-Ome nations. WMU seeks to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands of all indigenous peoples and their continued presence therein. Thank you and welcome to everyone here and everyone that has come together for this joyous occasion.
Good afternoon. It is truly an incredible pleasure to be here today for this afternoon's We Talk event with U.S. Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, Bryan Newland. My name is Carla Koretsky, and I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at Western Michigan University. Today, I have the incredible honor and privilege of announcing the formal launch of our new graduate certificate program in tribal governance, which will be offered through our School of Public Affairs and Administration in the College of Arts and Sciences beginning this fall. It's incredibly exciting. Yeah. So this program is the result of a really wonderful partnership and a very close collaboration between Western Michigan University and the Gun Lake Tribe, the Nottawasepi Huron, and the Pokagon bands of the Potawatomi. And I'd like to begin by thanking a group of people, really dedicated, wonderful individuals who made this program a reality, who took a vision and translated that vision into action. So among those are Western Michigan University trustee Kurt Trevan, Jim Colhane from our advancement office, former provost Jennifer Bott, Sam Morso, director of education with the Pokagon band, John, I'm going to get it wrong. Somebody give me. Shagnabby, thank you. Okay, John Shagnabby, senior director of government affairs with the Gun Lake Tribe. Andrea Rayner, higher education specialist with the Nottawasepi Huron Band, and Janan Cotto, who was previously director of education with the Gun Lake Tribe. I'm also so grateful to Udaya Wagley, who's the director of the School of Public Affairs and Administration, and all of the faculty of the school who have enthusiastically welcomed this program and seen it become reality. So let's give all of those folks a huge round of applause. So we first began to have conversations around how Western could better work with the three Southwest tribes, and especially about the need for a program that would provide formal credentialing and help to create a better understanding of issues related to sovereign nations and to tribal governance here in our broader community. And so we wanted to bring that program both to tribal members and also to members of the community who are non-native but interested in those topics and could benefit from having a much deeper knowledge. And so we began to have conversation and talk about what that program might look like quite some years ago. I started being a participant in those conversations back in 2019. And we were making wonderful progress. We started meeting in fall of 2019. Things were going great. We were having lots of meetings. We came to the beginning of spring 2020. Everything looked awesome. And then things got a little bit slowed down and interrupted. So in spite of that interruption, we I think, did a wonderful job of picking up. Even a global pandemic couldn't stop this program from happening. So we picked up our conversations again in 2021 and moved much, much closer to realizing our vision when Sam developed a course in tribal governance, which we launched in spring of 2022. And by all accounts, that course was absolutely incredible, just a tremendous, tremendous success, and showed us the potential, I think, for this program. I had the incredible pleasure of meeting with the group and with Sam and seeing that syllabus start to take shape, to see the incredible list of speakers and topics, and it made me want to be a student all over again. I still want to take that class. I'm going to sign up for it one of these days. And I'm just thrilled. I'm so thrilled that we were able to take that vision and create this graduate certificate program. Going forward, we are anticipating that we're going to keep this close collaboration. Those courses will be taught both by faculty here at Western and also by members of the community. We will have lots of content experts coming in and participating in the program all along the way. I think this is really an example of how we can create a truly exemplary partnership between the university and the community, and I am so excited to see where this is going to take us in the future. And with that, I would like to invite Becky Richards, chairwoman of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi, up to the stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It is so exciting to be here. This is my alma mater, graduated from Western Michigan University 30 years ago. I couldn't believe it when I stopped and thought about it, but being a public administration major, it was instrumental in guiding me to what I ended up doing, which was working for my tribe. Working in the early stages when Pokagon Band was federally restored in 1994. I started working in 1995, and the tribe honestly took a chance, and back then there was no specific coursework. So when I started working for the band, it was on-the-job training, learning as we went along, and I ended up 25 years with the government before taking on a tribal council role. But all that on-the-job experience, where does that go? I'm looking towards retirement in a few years, and we need to educate the next generation of tribal leaders, and this is just fantastic that this program is being launched. With 12 federally recognized tribes here in Michigan, the coursework and the education that they can take back to their communities and be future leaders is just tremendous. So I applaud the team that was diligent and saw this through to fruition. I'm just so excited to see what this brings and the future tribal leaders that we'll have in our communities. So thank you very much. And again, applause to everyone that worked on this project. And next, thank you. I'd like to introduce Ben Brenner, who is representing Gun Lake this afternoon. Matchi Benashiwich.
Bonjour. Well, it's wonderful to be here today. Great to see such a good turnout. And what a day we have today. Absolutely beautiful outside, incredibly toasty inside. I forgot my napkin to dab my forehead there. So again, my name is Ben Brenner. I'm a tribal council member for the Matchi Benashiwich Band of Potawatomi Indians, the Gun Lake tribe. Prior to that, I was tribal administrator. And playing off what Chairwoman was saying, Man, what a great opportunity a program like this would have been when I stepped into that role. Would have shortened the learning curve up just a little bit. So the one thing that I want to start talking about here is not only like why I feel so honored to be here and talk to you, but it feels great to me that I graduated from a school that is creating and implementing such an important program like this. I graduated from Western's law school 4 years ago, and it just feels great to be back here and to be able to say that Western is taking the initiative to create and implement such a program. It truly is a testament to their commitment to the tribes that they're able to accomplish this. And just kudos to them and kudos to everybody else that provided all their input and work to go forward. It's truly incredible. So everything that's went into this program is just so important to not only native citizens, but also people who don't have an affiliation with the tribal community. So tribal citizens, I hope, are gonna start to take this course, and I hope it's gonna be a spark that's gonna guide them back home and come to work for their tribal governments. I also hope that it's going to help them learn more about sovereignty and what it means to be a sovereign nation and learn how our government actually functions. Now, for those who don't have an affiliation with the tribal government, this is just going to be beneficial in so many different ways, but one way that I can see right away is the tribes don't operate in a bubble, right? Our presence is far-reaching past our borders. And so there's a good chance that somebody somewhere is going to have a relationship, a partnership, or do business with a tribe. And anything that they're going to learn from this program is only going to enhance that relationship. So I just want to say thank you and give a big chi miigwech to everybody who made this possible. This is truly an exciting time, and I just feel fortunate and humbled and grateful that I was able to be part of it. So miigwech.
And next I'd like to invite Jamie Stuck from the Nottawasawepi Huron Band to come up.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor and a blessing to be here today to celebrate this mile marker in our community. There's a lot of things going on, and it's a great day to be Indigenous. I want to start out with the different movements that are going on in the state that make things like this possible and true partnership to come out and prevail when it comes to our communities. I want to first thank the United Tribe of Michigan. You have 12 solid tribes working for the same thing that concerns our communities. We're able to put aside differences, and we're able to utilize our own resources and speak for our people. So just having that solid force with United Tribes of Michigan, all tribes for the first time since Governor Granholm are officially participating now. So that's great when you have 12 tribes on the same page for common issues that are within our community. I also like to take this opportunity to also thank the Confederacy of Michigan Tribal Educators and their directors. We have the Indigenous Education Initiative team that is with the state of Michigan. You take 12 tribes, 12 different departments, you take the state of Michigan, you take the leadership, and you have that government-to-government relationship, that partnership. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Governor Whitmer for making that executive decision at the beginning of her office, making it mandatory that each state department has a policy when it comes to consultation with tribes. A lot of the times tribes are being told, this is how your history is going to be taught, this is how your language is going to be taught, this is how we're going to decide for you. And now, moments like this, we have not only a place at the table or the consultation, we have the solutions to the problems that we're bringing to the table. And one of them is just educating people that, as Ben recognized, that we're everywhere. And, I live in a small little village of Scots. And, even in Scots, they're catching on about our people and what we're doing and the impacts we have. We don't necessarily have to have our regalia on. We don't have to have the bumper stickers. We're making impacts amongst all races. And in my opinion, I think the tribes are leading a good way as far as how true government-to-government relationships should be. We're very capable of, like I said, not only bringing the solutions, but making the decisions as far as how we're represented. And this project was not done in any other way but with full respect. The CM-TED groups were very well engaged. The initiative, the Indigenous Initiative team was involved. And I just want to say Chimigwech to Pokagon and Matchibenashiwish for including us in this journey and lending us the opportunity to support such a wonderful program that, Sam, you've created. And I really appreciate you. And you don't ever answer your phone, man. And I know why you don't answer your phone. Because the man is nonstop, and I really appreciate that, brother. Me and you have been in this for a while, and to see this come to fruition is truly truly blessing. A lot of our ancestors, our grandfathers, our grandmothers are smiling down on us right now because my grandfather, I'm 47, my grandfather was born in 1902, boarding school survivor, survived TB, had 4 jobs at once just to make ends meet. He was an evangelist. He had the original grill. He had a little gold tooth right here. So whenever he would smile, that grill would just come out at you. And my grandfather's grill is shining bright today because of this moment, and I really appreciate to be a part of this. On behalf of all 12 sovereign nations and the 3 bands of Potawatomi in this area in Southwest Michigan, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I come with a good heart, and I can't wait to see this take off. Ow.
Thank you. This is really just incredibly exciting. And now it is my pleasure to invite our Vice President for Government Affairs, Chef Brenneman, to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Whew. We're used to heated conversations at We Talk, but this one takes the cake. Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Jeff Brenneman. I'm the Vice President for Government Relations at Western Michigan University. Welcome to We Talk. I would say the spring We Talk event, but it's feeling like summer in here. If this is your first We Talk event, the initiative launched in 2020 to promote responsible personal engagements, even when our differences on deeply held values, political persuasions, or cultural backgrounds bring us apart. We celebrate the value of viewpoint diversity and open inquiry on college campuses and in our broader community. We discuss free speech rights and responsibilities. These topics can be difficult, so we offer programming to practice and hone the skills needed to, talk to each other. Let me just say how proud I am of the We Talk team for pulling this event off. This took some coordination. I know Emma Barada will thank some people later, but please join me in thanking my team for making this event happen today. The diversity of individuals at today's event is exactly why I love working at Western Michigan University. I want to acknowledge Global Ties Kalamazoo. This organization facilitates the international exchange of emerging and established leaders through the International Visitor Leadership Program. More than 500 former and current heads of states are alumni of this program. We have a delegation here today for the Edward R. Murrow Program for Journalists. The visiting journalists are from Argentina, the Bahamas, Burundi, Hungary, Romania, and Uzbekistan. Thank you for including us in your day. I hope you'll stay at the conclusion of our event. Even though it's hot, you'll have already sweat, so it's okay. If you stay at the conclusion, we're gonna have food and drink and hopefully deeper conversations. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. Our honored guest today has agreed to take some questions after his remarks. As you can tell, we're recording today's event for later use, so we'll use some technology for the Q&A to make production a little easier. During the talk, you can submit your questions at pollev, I think it's going to be on the screens here, pollev.com/WMU783. I'll do my best to take your questions. I'll have them on a little iPad, and I'll try to ask your questions as appropriate and as time allows. Since We Talk's inception in 2020, we've had inspiring national speakers and best-selling authors visit our campus. We provide practical training and tools for the groups that want to broaden their community dialogue. This important work at WMU has attracted support from individuals, foundations, and national organizations. I want to first thank Stephanie and Edward Fletcher for their founding sponsorship of We Talk 2 years ago. Thanks to their generous support, our work resulted in financial support from the national organization, the Heterodox Academy. WMU is now one of 21 universities in the Heterodox Academy campus community. We're the only designated university in Michigan, and we're in fine company with Cornell, MIT, UC Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, just to name a few. If you're part of the WMU community, I urge you to visit heterodoxacademy.org, where you can become a member at no cost. I also want to thank the Fetzer Institute. For the last year, the Fetzer Institute has been an incredibly important partner in We Talk. They helped bring Dave Isay to WMU. As a result, Mr. Isay sent his team to Kalamazoo to record interviews for StoryCorps' Civility Initiative, One Small Step. Last fall, we had Interfaith America's founder, Eboo Patel, and Bridge USA's CEO, Manu Meal, on a panel together. First time they'd ever been together. As a result, we now have students starting a Bridge USA chapter at WMU. Our partners at Fetzer Institute were unable to join us today, but they were excited to sponsor our program. The Fetzer Institute's mission is to help build a spiritual foundation for a loving world. Learn more at fetzer.org and sign up for Fetzer's newsletter. And now for today's special guest. Bryan Newland was President Joe Biden's choice to serve as Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs in the Department of Interior. This is the highest Senate-confirmed post for Indian and tribal affairs in the federal government. Michigan can be proud that Bryan hails from the beautiful Upper Peninsula. Bryan has always been driven to lead, passionate about his beliefs, and he's followed an honorable path of public service. How do I know? I've known Bryan since we both worked together at a law firm in Lansing 20 years ago. We're both grayer but wiser. More accurately, I'm grayer and he's wiser. I've also had the pleasure of working with Bryan while he was tribal chair for the Bay Mills Indian community. I've had the honor of visiting the beautiful Bay Mills community many times. During one of my visits, I attended the commencement ceremony for the Bay Mills Community College, where Bryan served as the commencement speaker. I called my wife on the ride home from the UP. I told her how moved and inspired I was by Bryan's words. I asked Bryan to visit us today to share a similar message. It's perfectly aligned with the objectives of We Talk. I usually stay in the background at our We Talk events, but I'm deeply honored to introduce you to my friend, Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, Bryan Newland. Welcome to Michigan, welcome home to Michigan, and welcome to Western Michigan University.
Holy wah, as they say in the UP. It's smoking. It's like a sauna. And I have to say it properly because there are some folks here who will check me on it if I don't pronounce sauna correctly. Buju and away maganaduk, minogijip, nibana mikana bamose and dishnakas mangan dodem, ginoshikaning and donjaba nishna bandao. My name is Bryan Newland. I come from the Bay Mills Indian community. I have the privilege of serving as the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. Most importantly here, though, I'm a proud Bay millionaire. That's right. And a proud Michigander. And I'm really honored and grateful for the chance to be with you all today. So I'm going to warn you in advance, I'm going to sweat. I know that they're recording. Jeff has assured me that they've got AI technology. They're going to take care of that by swapping me out for Jason Momoa in the recording. So those of you who watch later, you're better off for it, I promise. first I want to congratulate Western Michigan University on the new certificate because, as tribal president and the son of a tribal administrator and somebody who's worked with tribes across the country, there isn't really, I think the chairwoman said it best, there isn't really a blueprint for how to work for a tribal government. You just kind of learn it as you're doing. And tribal governance is every bit as complex, in many ways more so than working in a federal government or a state government or your local city. So it's as my big boss might say, it's a big deal to have this certificate. I also want to acknowledge my tribal leader friends and colleagues here, Chairman Stuck, Chairwoman Richards, and Councilman Brenner. It's great to have you here. I know how hard you all work on behalf of your people, so I'm very grateful that you can be here. And I also want to say I'm glad to be here on campus because my wife is actually an alumnus of Western Michigan University. She got her master's degree here just a few years ago. When we were living in the UP, she was working, being an awesome mom, and she would work half a day, drive down here 5 hours to go to class in the evening, and because she's a trooper and a glutton for punishment, she would drive 5 hours home after class and crawl into bed at 2 or 3 in the morning and get up and go to work the next day. And so she's a proud Western Michigan alum. This is a little bit different type of event than I normally do. As a Fed and as a bureaucrat, they invite us out and we go through the laundry list of here's all the awesome stuff we're doing on behalf of the president. Take a few questions and leave, and there'll be some of that, I promise. But I get to talk about myself a little bit and my journey and how it relates to the 7 grandfather teachings. But I get a little nervous because there's a lot of folks in here who I've known a very long time who can call me out if there's any fibbing or fluffing of the story. So I will do my best to tell it as I remember it. So first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I was brought up, where I was brought up, my journey to this job, this privileged position that I have right now, and then talk a little bit about what it is I actually do, because there are so many middle management bureaucrats in the federal government. It's helpful to understand our role. It is important. But I was raised on the Bay Mills Indian Reservation by my parents. My mom was 18 years old when I was born. My parents were very young. They had every reason in the world to not make it work, right? But they did. And so they raised me and my sister and my brother all the way through high school, where my grandma taught band. So I played the drums in band because that was, I thought, the least effort when I wasn't really given a choice whether to join band, but it was frustrating sometimes because I get off the bus after school and my parents knew everything that I had done at school before, I could lie to them about it. I graduated from there and went to Michigan State University at James Madison College. It was really difficult for me moving away from home and going to a big university after graduating with 35 people in my high school class. And I didn't know a lot of people at Michigan State. I didn't know a lot of people, I didn't really know anybody from outside the state of Michigan. And I didn't know a lot of people from other tribal communities, save for some folks I met at summer camps as I was growing up. And so I didn't really, have a big ladder or network of people at the time, it didn't seem like, to lift me up. But I was surprised by how many folks invested their love and energy into me. And when I was a sophomore in college, I applied for this national internship program called the Udall Congressional Internship for Native Americans, named after Congressman Mo Udall, who was a big advocate for Indian people. And I was rejected. And it was stung a little bit, humbling, because I hadn't been really rejected much in my life up to that point. And so, when you're 19 years old, you say, oh my God, I'm never going to do anything. I'm terrible. And I was encouraged to apply again the next year. And so the next year I applied for this congressional internship. And I had a friend and a mentor who agreed to write a letter of recommendation. And it was still to this day the best letter of recommendation I've seen anyone write ever. And I got in. He didn't have to do that for me, but I got in. And when I got to Washington, D.C., I was bunked up in a dorm room with this guy from South Dakota who was interning at that point for Senator Tom Daschle. So that will become relevant in a little bit, I promise. We became good, lifelong friends. So I finished that internship program. I had a lot of new friends from across the country. I had some self-confidence too, because I went out there and there's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who've gone to Ivy League schools, walking the halls of power, and I'm walking around there from Bay Mills, Michigan, thinking, do I belong here? And after that summer, I was thinking, these guys don't really have that much on us. And so I gathered some confidence. And I graduated from college, went to Michigan State University College of Law, but that's an interesting choice because that was not where I intended to go. My high school girlfriend, who is now my wife, and I unexpectedly had a baby on the way. And so my plans to go far away for law school were called into question. And I was working at I took a year off after college. I was working at a small PR firm in Lansing, and I got a cold call at work one day. And this guy on the other end says, hey, you don't know me, but I hear you're looking for law schools. I'm starting an Indian law program at Michigan State University, and I'd be interested in sitting down to lunch with you if you're willing to talk with me. So I did. Went to Subway, $5 footlong. Changed my life. And they offered me a scholarship because they really wanted to invest in this Indian law program. So I went to MSU, College of Law, with this professor. His name was Del Laverdure. And in 2006, Senator Tom Daschle lost his race for re-election. And a lot of his staff migrated over to this hotshot senator you guys may have heard of from Illinois. And he soon ran for president. And he had asked his team, as they were building out their campaign staff, they had asked my old internship roommate if he would sign on to be their native campaign organizer. And so we did. And when President Obama won his re-election, he was put on his presidential transition team. And so he called me up. I was working with Jeff at the time and said, hey, do you want to come be on the presidential transition team with me? I said, what? And he said, we need you really quick though, like next week. And so my wife and I talked it over, and I took a bet on myself. We took a bet on ourselves and took an unpaid leave from my job, went to Washington, D.C. and couch surfed for a few weeks. My wife graciously held down the fort back at home. And I got to serve on President-elect Obama's transition team. And shortly after that, I was asked by somebody who was appointed to serve as the principal deputy assistant secretary for Indian Affairs if I wanted to come back. And that was the law professor who had called and asked me to come to law school at Michigan State University. So I share that with you just as an example that there are a lot of people who have success, professional success. A lot of them work really hard and deserve to be there. But don't let anybody ever tell you that, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and did this all by myself, because there's so much luck involved. If I hadn't had a mentor take the time to write that letter of recommendation, if I hadn't had a friend who remembered me, if I hadn't had that law professor who just, by circumstance, I was able to meet, all these breaks made this moment here possible. And so I worked in President Obama's administration as the advisor to the guy who was doing my job, the job I have now. And then I went back home and started a small law firm with a buddy of mine in Lansing, and later on ran for tribal court judge back home at Bay Mills. And so I was elected to that position, which was transformative for me. And it's the more I look back on it, the more important that experience as tribal court judge becomes in my life. You know, when you're a circuit court judge or an appellate court judge or a Supreme Court judge, you know, everyone you're dealing with, they have lawyers oftentimes, even if they're public defenders in circuit courts. And the higher up you go in the court system, the more prestigious it is, the more resources you have. When you're a tribal court judge, you don't have any of that. And I was often coaching people through their cases, their criminal cases, their child welfare cases. We set up a wellness court to help, because we had a lot of people coming back through court over and over and over again with substance abuse problems. And that's really symptomatic of larger issues, as many of you know. So we set up a wellness court to divert folks away from jail and get them the resources they need. And it's just a couple of us working, you know, a staff of 3 and myself, handling issues that are every bit as consequential as what you might see in the federal courthouse over here. Because when your kids are taken out of your home, when you're going to jail and you're going to lose your job, you don't care if you're in tribal court or federal court or state court. It's scary stuff. And I did that job for 4 years, and then ran for tribal president back home in 2017. And that's a job I think my parents and anyone who's known me since I was little would tell you that I'd always wanted to do, and they'd be right. And I had big plans and big ideas. And those big plans and big ideas had absolutely nothing to do with COVID. You know, but that's ultimately where I found myself. And then in 2020, after President Biden was elected, when you serve in the federal government, a lot of folks who come back around and do those appointments, they remember you. So I was asked to come serve. Excuse me. Is it hot in here? So I left my job as tribal president, and that was hard because I really, you know, Chairman Stuck, it's a hard job, but it's rewarding, and I love doing that job. And but I left because I believed in this president. I believed in Secretary Holland, and so I resigned halfway through my term, and I started working not as a nominee, but as an appointed official who doesn't require Senate confirmation. And I traveled, this was 2 years ago this month, I traveled to the Navajo Nation with First Lady Jill Biden. And when we were out there, she announced my nomination by the president to serve in this position. And bear with me. You know, I thought of my parents, my mom, going to school in college, one class at a time. Thought of my dad getting off of his shift at the prison at 11 o'clock at night when I was a kid. And wondered if they had ever thought that the First Lady of the United States would be talking about their kid back in those days. And it's been an incredible journey to this point. But it's more than just an honor, it's a responsibility to be here and serve in this position. So folks might ask, what does the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs do? Well, let me tell you, we are the forward part of the federal government's trust relationship with 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, from the North Slope of Alaska down to the southern tip of Florida and everywhere in between. In this position, I oversee the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is one of the oldest federal agencies. We just had our 200th birthday. The Bureau of Indian Affairs started in the War Department, actually. It's older than the Department of the Interior. It's older than the Department of Education. It's older than the Department of Commerce, than the Department of Labor. We've been around for a really long time. And we do a lot of stuff. So if you think about all the things that a state government might do, tribal governments do that too. Schools, police, roads, water systems, dams, agriculture, economic development, all that stuff, we do it. And we've got, between the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Trust Funds Administration, we've got almost 14,000 employees, most of whom are native, most come from their communities. And we've got a long history in Indian country, and it hasn't always been a good history in our agency, but now in this administration, I feel like that's starting to change. The first time I showed up at the Department of the Interior when I was in my 20s, I was thinking, oh, you know, these bureaucrats don't know about Indian country. You're gonna get there and show them what's up. And then you get there and you find out, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of really smart, hardworking people here who are trying to make things better. And that's what we found here, and they were ready after a period of 4 years. They were ready for leadership from Secretary Holland and President Biden. And so we've been able to do a lot of stuff. Through the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act, we've invested $45 billion, with a B, into Indian country in this administration in 20 months. 20 months. So, for frame of reference, that is 15 years worth of the Bureau of Indian Affairs budget in 20 months. Secretary Holland has established a brand new unit within the BIA called the Missing and Murdered Unit, which is dedicated to coordinating investigations of all of the missing and murdered people across Indian country that have gone without the attention that they need. We've made record investments in public safety and community protection, including not just policing, but wellness courts, in an initiative that began under President Obama called the Tuwahe Initiative, which allows tribes to take some of these federal funds and bundle them together and design their own solutions on social services at the ground level. We're working to restore tribal homelands by putting land into trust. That was a commitment President Biden made himself. And we've also undertaken work to bring tribes to the table on the management of federal lands, national parks, national forests, and the like. We're defending the Indian Child Welfare Act, a historic law that I will talk about in a little bit. And of course, we're pursuing Secretary Holland's boarding school initiative to tell the truth about what this country did in establishing federally operated and funded boarding schools to forcibly assimilate Indian kids for a century and a half. So why do we do that? Why do we do this stuff for Indians? That's a question that people often want to ask. In groups like this, they might not be comfortable, so I'll just ask it for you if you're thinking it. Why do we have a special federal bureau for Indians and not a special federal bureau for other groups? Well, the federal government has this thing called the trust responsibility. It belongs to the entire United States. And the trust responsibility means that the United States is supposed to act in the best interests of Indian people. Now, where does this come from? Well, it comes from the Constitution as one place. If you read the US Constitution, I know a lot of people reference it, but don't actually read it. If you actually read the US Constitution, it explicitly mentions Indians 3 times. That includes Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. So it's one of the very first sections of the Constitution. The people who drafted that said that Congress has the power to regulate commerce with states, among the states, with foreign nations, and the Indian tribes. It doesn't say townships, it doesn't say cities, it doesn't say corporations, but it says Indian tribes. It also, the Constitution references the treaty powers, that treaties are the supreme law of the land. And the people, the same people we all learned about who wrote the Constitution, negotiated treaties with Indian tribes. That's the source of the trust responsibility, and it also comes from a course of dealing that in exchange for taking land from Indian people, the United States will place Indian people under the protection of the federal government. And just to be even more gratuitous and emphatic about it, the very first laws that this country passed after the Constitution was adopted dealt with Indian tribes. The Trade and, unfortunately named the Trade and Intercourse Act, was passed in the 1790s. The founding fathers passed this law to make sure that only Congress and the federal government were dealing with Indian tribes. So that's where the trust responsibility comes from. The United States, from the very, very, very beginning, took on this responsibility to work in the best interests of tribes and place Indian people under the federal government's protection. Didn't always work out in the way that we would want that to work out, but again, I think things are changing a little bit at a time for the better. So now I've explained to you who I am, where I come from, why I'm standing here in this sweatbox with you, and what I do. But we're also here to talk about the relevance of our cultural teachings here. So we have in Anishinaabe culture this principle called Minnow Bamadzwin. Minnow means good, Bamadzwin means life. And the translation is the good life. But Minnow, it's not something you would say like when you're saying, see you later, Jeff, have a good life. Minnow Bamadzwin means more. It means to live your life in a way that is in balance with yourself, with the people around you, and with the world around you, to live it in a good way. And the roadmap to doing it is really found in these, what we call the 7 grandfather teachings. Now, there's a lot of teachings. As anybody who's ever sat around a gathering with any number of tribal elders, there's a lot of teachings about a lot of stuff. But these are called the 7 grandfather teachings because they're important. And so I'm going to list them out for you. The first one is respect. And that doesn't just mean giving respect, shaking your hand, looking you in the eye. It means acknowledging the inherent value of the people and the world around you. Not giving respect because something or somebody can do something for you, but respecting the people and the world around you because in and of itself, it's worthy of it. The second grandfather teaching is love. It's not the kind of love like when you're a teenager and you're falling in love, or romantic love or friendship love. It's love for the people in the world around you without condition, again, without expecting that you get something from them because of their inherent value. And these are all related, as you're going to see. Truth is one of the grandfather teachings, Debwewen, which means when you speak the truth. Don't speak things that are false, but also speak the things that need to be said. Speak the truth. Bravery or courage is one of the grandfather teachings, and it means to do the things that must be done, even when it's not pleasant to do it, even when you're scared. Courage, bravery. Wisdom is a grandfather teaching, and it doesn't just mean smart, right? Because some people are smarter than other people. It means using the knowledge you have in the place, in manner, and way in which it was intended. Something we're all capable of. Honesty. So you heard truth was speaking the truth, speaking the words that need to be said. Honesty is living your actions, living in a way that is in accord with the way that you speak. Not being a hypocrite might be another way to explain it. And then humility, which means to know your place in the world, to not place yourself above other people, but also not place yourself above the world around us, our waters, our homelands, animals, birds, fish, to know your place in the world as equal with all other living things that have inherent value. Those are our grandfather teachings. And as I sometimes explain to my kid, really what it boils down to is don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk. Just be nice. Just be excellent to each other in the world around you. So I make my best effort to live my life in this way. And like any person, often fall far, far short of that. But I also make my best effort to guide the work that I do in this way, especially as tribal court judge and president and federal official. It's really important to use these teachings. When you're a tribal leader, you have to lead your people according to their value system. And this, incorporating these 7 grandfather teachings into my job here is especially important because of the trust relationship that we have with Indian tribes. So I mentioned as for a long time, the federal trustee tried to decide what was best for Indian people according to a value system that wasn't theirs. And in a way, we still do that because our system of laws in the United States wasn't built according to tribal value systems. But it's really hard to serve as a trustee to act in somebody's best interests if you're making those decisions on a value system that isn't theirs. How do you build that trust? How do you assure them that I actually am acting in your best interests? So it's especially important in doing a job like this to bring an indigenous value system to work. And of course, there are a lot of tribes, and our value systems and teachings are different from one another. And so it's not fair to assume that because I'm Ojibwe, that I'm going to, that's going to fit perfectly with somebody who's Yupik from Alaska or Pueblo. But we have other people who serve in the office where I work and across the federal government who bring their indigenous value systems to work with them too. And it's important that we do that. So what I want to do now, briefly before we do some Q&A, before everybody passes out, is just share a little bit about some examples of how these teachings, how I've seen them work in my career and in my life. So when it comes to respect, the teaching of respect, we do a thing here with the federal government called tribal consultation. So if we're going to adopt a regulation, and that regulation is going to affect the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, we don't adopt that regulation and say, deal with it, Chairwoman. We say, here's a regulation we think we would like to adopt. Chairwoman, we invite you to send your people and sit down and talk with us before we put it into effect. Let us know what you think about it. And then when it works well, we get feedback and learn a lot, and then we make some changes, and then the tribes say, that's a really good idea, let's go forward. And so we adopt that regulation. And we do that out of respect, because these rules affect the people on the ground in their daily lives, and it would be wrong to just impose them. And we don't do it because tribes have political power to twist the federal government. We do it because tribes are inherently worthy, and Indian people are inherently worthy of respect by the United States. The United States could carry on grinding tribes under the massive gears of the federal government, and most people in the world wouldn't really pause. But we do that because we have a moral and legal obligation, but that's based on this fundamental nature of respect, because tribes and Indian people who are impacted in their daily lives by these laws are affected by them. I've also seen this teaching of respect play out. Last year, I visited a tribe in California, the Tule River Indian tribe, which is up in the mountains east of the Central Valley. And they had had terrible forest fires that had ravaged the area in recent years. And they have old growth sequoia trees, over 1,000 years old, on and off the reservation. They're sacred to their people. And as they took me through their reservation, we had seen where the fire had passed through, but they had been managing their own forests according to their own traditional methods in a way that protected those trees. And they protected those trees because the tribe understood the inherent value that they're relatives. Those ancient trees are relatives of their people. And so they were inherently worthy of that respect, and they backed it up by action. Interestingly enough, when we drove off the reservation into the national forest, the sequoia trees on the reservation had charring on the bark, but they were still standing. When we drove off the reservation just a mile down the road, it was like a bomb had gone off. So the tribe's practices of respecting their relatives in their forests actually protected them on their reservation. Wisdom is another teaching that I have seen at play a lot. So when I first went to Washington, D.C., I talked to my dad about this, and he's a state employee for most of his career, and had told me about how frustrating it was. These bosses come and go, and they show up and they drag you to your office and they make you do this thing and they summon you for this and that. And he said, make sure you get out of your office once in a while and meet people where they're at, especially the people you outrank. And that today is one of the, if I were to write down the top 10 operating principles for working in any organization, that's been one of the most valuable. I still to this day, when I was chairman, when I was judge, when I was there before, if I'm going to meet with folks in our organization, especially just for a chat, I try to go to where they're at and be on the other side of the desk and change those power dynamics in the organization so we can have an honest conversation one-on-one. And that was wisdom at play. When I was working at the department under President Obama, the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs was a man named Larry Echohawk. Very kind man, very patient. And we were in this meeting. It was myself and Larry and a tribal leader. And I think the tribal leader may have had an attorney with them. There's usually attorneys there. The chairman, the tribal leader, was giving the assistant secretary the business, going to town. We were only feet apart, and the voice was raised, and Larry Echohawk was sitting there very calmly. And I was getting riled up myself because I was saying, you're not going to come in here and yell at my boss like that. And he kept touching my wrist, telling me, just chill out, Bryan. And after the meeting, he said, that man isn't mad at me. He said, he's here on behalf of his tribe. He's carrying the voices of his people, and they're upset with the federal government. And we happen to be sitting here as representatives of the federal government today. And so to do our jobs well, you have to understand that you can't take this personal. You're the face of the federal government, warts and all. And so that's something that I've carried forward with me today. And also those are good examples of humility as well, in addition to wisdom. Honesty. So this one is, there's lots of examples. As a licensed attorney, as Councilman knows, we have a code of ethics that we have to follow in our jobs. As a federal official, a code of ethics. But it means living in a way, acting in a way that's in accordance with those rules and those expectations. Not taking the free coffee, the free lunch, the free junket to the convention, all those things, because the public has to trust that where they're doing this work for the right reasons. And so I've seen a lot of honesty in the legal profession. I've seen some dishonesty. When I was an attorney, I represented a tribe where a lawyer had come into the tribal court and lied, blatantly lied. Everybody knew it. And then when the tribal court tried to discipline him, as it has the authority to do, he left and he refused to pay the fine. And then he tried to sue the tribe, the tribal court, the tribal judge, and besmirch them. He's tried to sue me when I was brought in, all because he wanted to collect an extra $80 in his filing fees. And so that's an example of dishonesty or not acting in accordance with these ethics rules. And ultimately, after many, many years, he was sanctioned by the State Bar of Michigan for that conduct. So that's an example of that. Bravery. People don't often associate bureaucrats with bravery. And it's not bravery in the way that you might see on the battlefield or running into a forest fire. But I can tell you I've seen some people do some courageous things in public service. I mentioned when I was tribal president, I didn't sign up to be tribal president during COVID. Our tribal council members didn't sign up to be council members managing a global pandemic. And we sometimes forget, but try to remember what those early days of COVID was like, how scary it was. And we gathered, the 5 of us on our tribal council. We said we had to have a game plan. What's our operating principle? And we said together, no advisors, nobody in the room, just the 5 of us. We said, our objective is that nobody in our community should die from this virus. That's our goal. That's our operating principle. And we were all scared that some mistake, some oversight, some form of neglect would cause us to fail. And it was incredibly stressful. But I also saw the best of our people in that effort. Ingenuity. Ultimately, our tribe was the first health provider in the Eastern Upper Peninsula to do what we now know as surveillance testing. Remember, there was no tests for a long time, so it was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So our people and our leadership said, we're going to test people for COVID, not just on the reservation, but everywhere. We got to know. They made sure that not only were tribal members vaccinated, but everyone in the region. And after 3 years, we lost 1 person to COVID on the reservation. And it was a terrible, terrible loss when we did. But that was bravery in action from our tribal leaders collectively. And that's one of the things I'll be the most proud of till the day I die, is the work that our team did in response to COVID. Love is the last teaching before I wrap up here. And I have 2 examples of this. One is a year ago this month, I was traveling through Alaska visiting different tribal villages, places where you got to land on the dirt runways to get to. And one village we went to, we were there and they put us up in a dormitory. And they said, we're really embarrassed because normally we would feed you as our guests, but we can't feed you because we don't have fish in our rivers anymore to feed you. But you should have seen our king salmon. We haven't caught a king salmon in years here in our village. That's what our people live off of. And we're sorry that we can't feed you. We said, it's okay. And then after our meetings finished, they said, we haven't had a community gathering since before the pandemic. So we're going to put on a dance for you guys, just impromptu. And they gathered the whole village, just like that. And they put on a dance for us. And we danced with them and sang and celebrated and just forgot about the jobs we were doing and just existed as people. And after that dance, we went back to the dormitory where we were staying, and there was a knock on the door. And there was a guy standing at the door who had been around all day and hadn't spoken much. And he had a Ziploc bag with dried king salmon. And he said, I want to give this to you so you can taste it. They hadn't caught a king salmon in their village for years, but he had some to share. That was I'll never forget that as long as I live. That was a powerful, powerful moment. And the last bit where I've seen love in action in our work is this boarding school initiative. The people doing this work at the Department of the Interior and the federal government are mostly Native people themselves. Most of our team who's doing this work have family members who've gone through these boarding schools, suffered abuse, or lost family members at these schools. And they're listening to these traumatic stories from people describing the worst things that have ever happened to them in their lives. They're reading these awful documents day after day after day. And it's hard. It's hard for our team to do that emotional labor on top of this historic, groundbreaking work. I know it's hard for myself, it's hard for the secretary to do this work, but it's important that we do it out of love for our relatives, out of love for the people who went through these schools, who are living, out of the people who are coming after us, also to tell the truth, to speak the truth about what happened, but also in a way it's love of country too. Because when you love somebody, you hold them accountable. You hold each other accountable. When you're married, it's frustrating sometimes, right? When you have a relationship and you get called on it, on the stuff that your partner knows. When you have relatives who are acting up, you hold each other accountable. And it's important to tell the truth about our country, because if we're going to believe in that trust responsibility, if we're going to believe in all the things that we say this country is capable of, we have to be willing to speak truth about it and to hold it accountable out of love so we can do better and have a better relationship. And so these are some examples of the grandfather teachings I've seen in action over the course of my career. And while it's not officially a grandfather teaching, gratitude is something that is imbued in everything we do as Anishinaabe people. It's not even, I learned recently that there was never a word for thank you for a long time, that because it wasn't necessary, because gratitude was built in to the things that we did. And so I want to express my gratitude to all of you for bearing with me through my long remarks in this hot room, for taking your time today to come out and listen. Those of you who may be challenged by what I've said or learn something new, I'm grateful that you took a chance to listen. And also, I want to thank my parents who are sitting back here at this back table. So, Chimigwich, thank you all so much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? All right. Thank you, Bryan. That was great. I think it was a great lesson for all of us to learn a little bit more about how we can adopt the teachings of the seven grandfathers. So can you give me, and I want to remind everyone, again, the pollev.com, maybe Jack can put up the graphic, it's up there, pollev.com/WMU783. Go there, you can enter a question, and I'll take your questions up here for Bryan. Can you give me an example in your current work of where you've encountered someone, I'm sure, that disagreed with you, and how you've then used those teachings to maybe diffuse the situation, to find common ground? We're in a polarized society. I'm sure not every day is sunshine and roses.
Well, I think, so going back to what I had mentioned earlier about humility and wisdom, my dad's lesson about meeting people where they're at, I've always found that to be a useful tool to try to reach agreement. You know, especially if you're the boss and you disagree with somebody and you say, "Come to my office," that never goes well. Right? Nobody leaves that meeting feeling good. And so trying to meet people where they're at, And as anybody who's known me a long time knows that I may be more prone to talking than listening, especially when I was younger, but working hard to hear people, to really hear them. And that was another thing when I worked for Assistant Secretary Echo Hawk that he taught me, is he said, most people, if you respect their dignity, if they have an opportunity to be heard, really heard, and also if you explain yourself, if you show your work, most people will accept things not going their way if they understand why, and if they understand that they had an opportunity to say their piece before the decision was made. And so I've always tried to do that as a way to manage disagreement.
So you're clearly you have a public servant heart. You talked a little bit about the work that you're doing, but tell me one thing that you've done in the last, or that you're working on currently, that gets you up every day excited to go to work.
A lot of things get me excited to go to work. It's work, so you don't get excited every day. So, for me, as I've gotten older, I've really realized how much I've always really loved the outdoors and the connection to land. So I'm going to go on a meandering journey with you here, Jeff, for a second. But if you think about people who take their family and they visit the old world and they go, Italian Americans, they go to Italy and they walk the streets that their ancestors walked. That's a big deal for folks, right? I think at some level we all understand why that's important, because there's just a feeling that's hard to describe and quantify. And for Indian people, they get to do that every day in their homelands, and so there's a connection there. And at the Department of the Interior, in addition to doing Indian Affairs, we also do the National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service. And so I get really excited about the work that we're doing on co-management, tribal co-management, where Secretary Holland and Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, have issued this order that our land management agencies should work with tribes on managing federal lands in a way that tribes have a seat at the table, so that they're respecting the tribe's cultural ties to those lands in a way that recognizes that tribes still subsist off those lands, still engage in treaty hunting and fishing. That stuff gets me excited every day.
So we have some questions from the audience. Obviously, we're in a social media polarized world. Is it a challenge to live by the 7 grandfather teachings in a world that seems to revolve around opposite values?
You betcha. Yes. So those of you here who are from Indian country know that tribal politics happens on Facebook now, right? And it was difficult for me. So I've mostly quit Facebook, and it was difficult for me when I was chairman, especially in the early days of the pandemic, when people were acting. They would say things on Facebook. People I knew and would see. They would say things on Facebook. I would be like, I've never heard Jeff talk like that. And then I'd see them in the community and they wouldn't talk like that. And it, like, that cognitive dissonance was literally painful. And so I said enough with that part of it. But it's difficult because it takes the humanity out of our relationships with one another. You forget that it's like when you're somebody honked at me driving over here. It's when you're in the car and so the person in front of you doesn't move at the red light and you're really mad, but you forget there's a person behind the steering wheel. Maybe they're having a bad day and they're having a bad moment, but you don't see them. You don't think about all that because there's no connection. So those 7 grandfather teachings are based on connection between ourselves and other people in the world around us. And if you're not forcing yourself to be aware of it, it's really hard to live by it.
I think we've all realized in the work that We Talk is doing, you have to work at it. You have to work to live by those values. And if we're going to have true change, it takes effort and training and honing those skills. Here's a question about what are the barriers and limitations you've heard or experienced from Native American or Indian students in regards to pursuing a higher education?
What are the barriers and limitations you've heard or experienced for Indian students to pursue higher education? So one of the things that I still see that I've taught as an adjunct professor. I've got a son in college now. Most folks, when they go away to college, it's scary for everyone. I don't care what race you are, what class or background you come from, but the tribal way of life, if you grew up in a tribal community, you take for granted sometimes as a kid that everybody and everything you need and know is around you all the time. I saw my grandma at school. I saw my other grandma across the street from me every day. I didn't learn until I went to college that seeing 50 cousins around the neighborhood was not a normal thing. And so when you go, right, and it's 50, I didn't stutter. When you go to college, though, in higher education, you've got the normal hurdles of adjusting, but you've got this pull of you're disconnected from your lands. I grew up on the shores of Lake Superior. It was weird for me to be in Lansing with not a drop of water in sight, unless it was the Red Cedar River. And to not have just my family around me all the time. And there are Native students who come from privileged backgrounds who they grow up in their tribal communities who still have that struggle, because I think it's a cultural thing. And there are a lot of challenges, but in my experience, that's one of the big ones, is the disconnection.
So another question, I guess, related to that would be, what would be a great next step for a university like Western? Is it a Native American Studies department, or is it Native scholars? I mean, what would maybe make that experience a little bit better and a little more comfortable?
I know for us, I'm just going to speak about my own experience, but for me, having a community of Native students on campus and having Native mentors on campus was important. And one of the things that I graduated 20 years ago next month, which is really weird. One of the things though that still stands out in my mind is we did this thing called Supper Club, where once a month on a Sunday, we'd gather together and some of the Native staff and faculty would cook, Indian tacos or fish or wild rice, and it was just like a little bit of a flavor of home, when you're unsure of yourself. And so it's important to have that on campus. I think it's important to have that for everybody, but to create that sense of community. And there are some intangibles that you can't build artificially, but investing in it is important.
Can you describe some of the goals and outcomes happening from the good work that your office is doing in the boarding school healing initiative?
Yeah, so the first goal, if you step back, if you talk about healing, we want to heal the wounds that exist between the United States and Indian people. I talked about that trust relationship, and it is a relationship, but you can't have a healthy relationship with a festering sore, some unacknowledged pain. You can't, especially like that, you just can't move past it. So the first part of healing from that is telling the truth about it and being honest and accountable for it. And this country this is the first time the United States federal government has ever done this, has ever said, here's how many schools we operated. Here's where they were. Here's how many kids died at these schools. Here's where they're buried. Here's what happened. People who, those who went there, tell us what happened to you. And getting that truth out there is the very first step to healing that relationship. So the goal is always to build a better relationship between the sovereign tribal nations and Indian people and the federal government, in making sure that Indian people can live lives of dignity with meaning and continue their tribal way of life, and for the federal government to support that, which is our trust responsibility. But to do that, you've got to have trust, and to have trust, you've got to be accountable for what you've done wrong.
TV portrayals have changed a lot in recent years. There's been a couple shows as of late that's caught the attention of many people. Taylor Sheridan, Yellowstone, 1883, 1923. What do you think of how that portrayal is changing, and does it have some more room to go?
Well, I think of other shows. Reservation Dogs is a great example, because that's Native people telling Native stories, and Rutherford Falls. There's a great show on Hulu called Letterkenny. It's not for everybody. It can be a little crass, but they actually do a great job of bringing Native writers to the table and writing Native characters. And the portrayal in those shows of Native people is real. I laughed so many times watching those shows because you just recognize somebody. In Rutherford Falls, there's this great scene. If you haven't seen that show, there's a character played by an actor named Michael Gray Eyes, and he's like the CEO of the tribal casino. And he's going to meet these big, powerful people from New York. And so he goes to the safe in his office, and he opens it up, and it's like all this Native jewelry in there. And so he's like, like he's putting on a battle suit. He's really trying to like be a little bit extra. And he takes out the feather, and he's going to tie it in his hair, and he says, "No, too much," and he puts it back. And I laugh so hard at that, because I've had those moments too, where you're just like, I've really got to be a little bit extra here. So the portrayal in those shows is great, and I think it's accessible to people who aren't Native too. But if you want a window into Native people writing Native characters about life in Indian country, those are good shows.
Somebody said, please speak about the generational trauma as it relates to tribal schools. Also, the importance of tribal cultural curricula being maintained.
Yeah. I think of how I want to answer that or respond to that. We don't, in our country, regardless of who we're talking about, we don't really yet have a real understanding of how your mind and your body are connected, how your mental health affects your physical health, and how that affects your relationships. I'll give maybe an example. Might be one of the best ways. Is I was at Secretary Holland and I do these listening sessions with boarding school survivors around the country, and they're tough. People stand up in a gymnasium full of people and talk about the worst things that have happened to them. And at one of these sessions, there was a woman who was around my age, and she stood up and she said that she hadn't gone to boarding school, but she wanted to talk about her family. And she worked at an urban Indian health center. And she said a letter had come in with somebody trying to find a girl they had went to boarding school with decades before. And the letter said, this girl was my best friend, and I always wondered what happened to her. And she said the letter had a picture in it, and she said she opened the picture and her jaw dropped because it was her mom. And she said she never knew her mom went to boarding school. And that she said, I always had a really bad relationship, or a bad relationship with my mom. I just thought she was mean. And she said, you know, her whole life in that moment just made sense, her whole relationship with her mom. And so you think about intergenerational trauma. A lot of times people, you know, I've heard it in my life, you know, they'll see those Indian kids, you know, why they act in that way, or why can't this community just be better? And, you know, those kids, when they're acting up, or a community, when you see it doesn't look like a nice community, that didn't just happen. It didn't just happen because Indian people said, you know, we want to have broken connections. That was done. And when you think about that story of that woman, I mean, you're talking something that happened decades prior to her mom, when her mom was a child, and the tale of that, the legacy of that was still affecting their relationship today. It affects how you parent, and how you parent affects how your kids are raised, and their mental health, their physical health. And so these boarding schools scrambled that all up, and it put a lot of pain into these relationships, and we still deal with it. People who never went to these schools, people 2 generations removed from these schools, are still dealing in their own lives with the pain that was inflicted at these schools.
Yeah, it's a really important topic. I want to thank Dean Sisler back here from the College of Health and Human Services. We have a wonderful childhood trauma assessment center in this college, and a resiliency center that helps deal with trauma. It has generational impacts if we don't recognize and respond to trauma. So it was a great question. If you could achieve one thing during your tenure as Assistant Secretary, what would it be?
Only one? Can I pick like 3? So one of the ways a lot of us who are working in this administration worked in government before, and I think had some lessons about making sure that our policies are lasting, the work that we do is lasting. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that the regulations that we've got on a number of things related to tribes go into effect. And a lot of the regulations, because you remember I told you the Bureau of Indian Affairs is 200 years old. A lot of our regulations are old, really old, older than me. And so they need updating. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're really resetting and reforming that relationship is to get our regulatory reform work done. That might sound boring to people, but I promise you it's really important.
Is that it? Was that 3?
Well, there's a lot of different regulations we're doing, but we're redoing regulations on how tribes, restore their homelands, put their reservation lands into trust. We're redoing regulations about the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act, the Indian Arts and Crafts Board regulations, oil and gas leasing regulations in some places. There's a lot.
Someone asks, how would you approach repatriation efforts on boarding school grounds?
That's a thorny question. There are a lot of well-meaning people when it comes to repatriation who want to do the right thing, but not every tribe feels the same about exhuming people who've been buried and moving them, and even within tribal communities, people don't feel the same. And so, a lot of these boarding schools have cemeteries. And a lot of these cemeteries have kids from many, many different tribes. And so not every tribe wants their kids, their aunties and uncles and grandparents dug up and brought home. Some do. And so having a process that's respectful of all of those views, and a process that also makes sure that for the kids who are buried at their schools, that is protected. So it's something we're giving a lot of thought to, and we want to make sure that we're really being focused on the relationship that we, the federal government, have with each tribe.
Okay, this question is from across the globe, from a journalist in Romania. How was the relationship with Native Americans during the previous administration?
Well, I was a tribal leader during the time. And I will say this, there were people who worked in the previous administration, including in the office where I work now, who we worked very well with, who would return phone calls and who did their best. And you know, there were some instances in some areas where tribes were able to have working relationships on some issues. And so I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, and I think that's all I'll say about that.
Fair enough. I think we got through most of the questions, or covered most of the topics, but the last one, the most important and the toughest one, did an indigenous artist make your tie?
Yes. This tie was a birthday gift from my mom back here, but it was it's a print of Norval Morrisseau, who is an Ojibwe artist who came from Northern Ontario, who's really, really famous and was sometimes called the Picasso of the Great Lakes. So I encourage you to check out his stuff. But I want to add that I come from a family of artists. My great-grandpa, my mom's grandpa, used to paint any hard surface with any paint he could find, and landscapes, local landscapes in northern Michigan, is exceptional. And then his kids, my grandpa and his brothers, painted and played music. I have an uncle who built floats for big parades and paper mache. And my mom paints now, my daughter paints, my aunties paint, cousins paint, everybody but me, pretty much. But I have a great appreciation for art, and it's a proud legacy of our family.
Great. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you for coming today to Western Michigan University.
Thank you.
A couple quick announcements, and then we'll let you get some refreshments before you pass out. So hold on, I'm going to turn the mic over to Emma Barada.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emma Barada. I'm the graduate assistant with We Talk in Government Relations here at Western. First and foremost, I want to give our sincerest thank you once again to Bryan Newland for being here today, for taking the time out of your incredibly busy and important schedule to be here with all of us in Kalamazoo and to share your wisdom and your experience. We so greatly appreciate it. Yes, thank you. I would also like to thank many of the people who made this event today possible. We truly couldn't have done this without many contributors. So just to name a few of them, we want to once again thank the Fetzer Institute for their support of We Talk. We would like to thank Dr. Dee Sherwood for so much work into making this event possible. We truly couldn't have done this without you. We'd also like to thank the School of Public Affairs and Administration, Dr. Matthew Mingus. Thank you to Dr. Carla Koretsky for being here today, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Keep the claps going for everyone. We'd also like to thank the Western Michigan University Native American Affairs Council and the Native American Student Organization for their contributions today. And thank you to the College of Health and Human Services and to Dean Sisler and his team for hosting all of us. And thank you to the provost for being here and reading our land acknowledgement. We're really grateful to have so many supporters of We Talk, and of course, thank you to all of you for being here, for enduring this heat. At the end of the day, We Talk is about bringing people together. And so we're really glad that you all have taken the time to be here. And we ask that if you're willing to continue bearing the heat, that you stick around for some food and drinks and conversation to continue meeting each other and meeting new people. And to conclude, my last piece of housekeeping, you'll notice there are surveys on your tables. If you wouldn't mind filling those out to help us continue to improve and expand WeTalk's programming, we'd really appreciate it. You can just leave them on the tables when you're done and we'll come around and grab them. And to conclude today's event, I would like to introduce Sam Morceau, Director of Education for the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and professional instructor in the WMU School of Public Affairs and Administration, as well as Skylar Wolverton, President of the Native American Student Organization. Thank you so much.
And I wanted to say one more quick thing before we do the presentation, which is that Western Michigan is committed to attracting Native students and Native faculty to our campus. So we actually have some of our recruiters here. And so if you're thinking about a place where you can find home, a place that has created incredible leaders like this one, please consider entrusting your children, your community to Western Michigan University. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just want to provide an opportunity to say thank you so much. It wouldn't be possible without Skylar Wolverton, who is the NASO president, as well as Jordan Morsaw, who is the youth council president for the Pokagon Band, our chairperson. This journey for me started back in 2019 when I was a director of education. I was welcomed to Western Michigan University to work on a land acknowledgement agreement. When you talk about trust responsibility, I think Western has fulfilled that obligation, continuing to work with us in terms of providing new programs and services, not only within the Masters of Public Administration, but across the board. I think it truly is an appreciation of Western to look at all levels and see how we could look at our advocates, from the NASO to the provost office to the deans to the different colleges, to be able to offer this opportunity. During 2019, during that land acknowledgement agreement, the Pokagon Band, Nottawasipi, and Gun Lake gifted the president a copper blanket, which is representative of our cultural teachings. This is the same blanket that we give to honor our people who are honored in our community with a copper sunset. Every bachelor gets a sunrise blanket. And just as a token of our appreciation in terms of the commitment under the relationship building, we would like to offer the same blanket to Mr. Bryan Newland for his commitment to Indigenous communities throughout the nation. So with that being said, thank you so much for your service to Indian community and what you do to the people of Michigan. Miigwech. This blanket was designed by 8th Generation. It was something that was really near and dear to our hearts. We have a relationship with Pendleton that we wanted to change. So reaching out to Native-inspired and Native Indigenous, looking at our cultural values was so important. So this was a custom blanket made for the Pokagon Band. It shows our cultural teachings with strawberries, as well as us as being the people of the three fires. One of the things I'd like to talk about is the tree represents our pathways. And as we continue to talk about our pathways, as Bryan has shared his pathway, the many different stops that he's made, the way that he continues to give back to our community, that symbolizes in that blanket. So no matter what you do in terms of your cultural achievements, being able to come back and work in communities and give those gifts back is true and near and dear to our hearts. And that's why we take this blanket and we give it to the people that we honor to hold up that commitment, such as honoring the grandfather teachings. You can see that with his mother and father here today. You can see he continues to come back and serve our communities. And without his assistance, none of this would be possible. So again, thank you so much. Are you going to wrap them? Yes. Okay. Yep. Yeah. And just to warm them up a little bit warmer, we got a nice wool blanket. And I am not sure if Dee would like to come up and say a few more words, but I believe that we're going to do a traveling song for safe travels. Again, thank you so much. There's going to be food and refreshments available. Please stick around and cool off and enjoy some deeper conversation. Miigwech.